What if I told you that the fiercest enemies of the Vikings were not swords, storms, or rival warriors, but something far quieter and deadlier: the cold itself. True death crept unnoticed through the cracks in their homes, seeping with the icy breath of the polar night. The Vikings, masters of the oceans, faced a battle every year against the relentless winter. Their ingenuity was their shield, turning homes into living machines capable of sustaining life in a world where even mercury froze. And one small detail in the design of their roof saved entire settlements from dying in their sleep. The first thing you notice about a Viking settlement is the unique curved shape of their longhouses. These walls were never straight. They bowed outward, like the hull of an overturned ship. This wasn't a tribute to maritime traditions, it was engineering. Straight walls take the full force of the wind, blowing precious heat away. Curved walls guide the air smoothly around the house, reducing heat loss and the pressure of storms. The Vikings understood the wind intuitively, building their homes with precise orientation to minimize its power. The ends of each house faced the gentlest winds, creating calm zones where warmth could stay trapped even during the fiercest blizzards. Inside, the longhouse was one open hall. There were no unnecessary partitions to block the flow of warm air from the central hearth. Low ceilings along the walls created cozy pockets for sleeping, while every cubic meter of space was used efficiently. They even sank floors below ground level, using the earth as a natural insulator. The ground maintained stable temperatures, protecting the house from freezing. Walls were carefully constructed depending on local resources: thick logs packed with moss and wool, stone, and peat in treeless regions. Some walls reached 2 meters thick, transforming the house into a fortress against the cold. Above it all, the massive turf roof acted as a living organism. Layers of soil and grass intertwined with thousands of roots formed natural insulation. A layer of birch bark prevented rot and kept water out. During the day, the roof absorbed what little solar heat there was, slowly releasing it at night. Its mass prevented it from blowing away, even in the harshest Atlantic storms. Sometimes, goats and sheep grazed on the roofs, maintaining the grass and adding to this remarkable microclimate. The hearth burned constantly, and the smoke that filled the upper part of the longhouse was no accident. Smoke trapped heat, preventing it from rising too quickly and warming the lower living spaces. It even preserved the beams and straw, acting as a natural antiseptic and pest deterrent. It wasn't comfortable, but it kept the family alive. The Vikings shared their homes with livestock. Cows, goats, and sheep stayed inside, providing body heat and protection from the storm. Manure was collected and dried as fuel, and even bones and fat from meals were burned when wood ran out. Every bit of energy was maximized. Their clothing was another marvel. Wool, layered carefully, repelled water and retained heat even when damp. Fur-lined hats, cloaks, and leggings to prevent heat loss from critical points. Every layer trapped air, creating an insulating barrier that turned the human body into a walking furnace. Sleeping arrangements were precise. Raised platforms kept people off the cold floors. Families slept huddled together, sharing warmth. Straw, hay, and animal skins created insulating layers, and even the breath of 2 or 3 people could warm a small sleeping niche. Food played a critical role in survival. High-fat, protein-rich diets fueled internal heat. Dried meat, smoked fish, dairy products like skyr, and butter provided energy to withstand the relentless cold. Fermented foods even supported digestion and overall health. Hygiene was equally strategic. Steam baths or primitive saunas allowed the Vikings to cleanse, regulate body temperature, and stay healthy. These baths were also social spaces, where disputes were resolved, stories were told, and plans were made. Crafts, games, and storytelling kept minds sharp, and winter holidays brought feasts and celebrations that broke the monotony of endless darkness. Every detail, from the crooked walls to the turf roof, from livestock heat to wool clothing, from the hearth to the sauna, was part of a single survival system. The Vikings did not conquer nature, they learned to live within its laws. Looking at their settlements today, it's clear, these were not primitive people enduring hardships, they were ingenious engineers of survival, masters of adapting to one of the harshest climates on Earth. While everything around them froze, inside the longhouses, life, warmth, and ingenuity thrived. Even as the snow eventually melts and the long nights give way to sunlight, the wisdom of the Vikings remains. They survived not because they were stronger than the cold, or braver than their enemies, but because they understood it. They observed the wind, studied the land, and designed every element of their lives to conserve warmth and protect life. Every hearth that burned, every turf roof layered with grass and soil, every raised sleeping platform and shared blanket, it was all part of a carefully crafted system. Humans and animals lived together in harmony, every resource used to its fullest, every detail engineered with experience and foresight. The Vikings remind us that survival is not about conquering nature, it's about learning its laws and working with them. Their homes, clothing, food, and social practices were all part of one integrated strategy for enduring life in the frozen north. Today, their settlements are long gone, but their legacy endures. From crooked walls to smoke-filled longhouses, from sleeping with animals to the careful layering of wool and fur, they left behind lessons in resilience, ingenuity, and adaptation. And as the wind howls through the modern world, we can remember the quiet brilliance of those who lived under ice, survived against all odds, and kept their fires burning when everything around them turned to ice. The story of the Vikings is more than a tale of survival, it's a lesson in human ingenuity. Without electricity, modern materials, or technology, they engineered homes, diets, clothing, and social systems that kept entire communities alive through the harshest winters. Their world was unforgiving, yet they thrived. They remind us that preparation, observation, and working with nature can achieve what might seem impossible. Every curved wall, every turf roof, every layer of wool was a strategy to outsmart the cold. In our modern lives, surrounded by warmth and convenience, it's easy to forget the skill, resilience, and creativity required to survive in the frozen north. The Vikings' methods may seem extreme, but they worked and they saved lives. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: survival is not about brute strength. It's about understanding, adaptation, and using every resource wisely. When you think about enduring hardships, whether in life, in nature, or in the unknown challenges ahead, remember the Vikings. They faced the cold not with fear, but with knowledge, ingenuity, and the warmth of community. And in the end, that is what truly kept them alive while everything around them turned to ice. Surviving the frozen north wasn't only about physical structures, clothing, or food, it was about mindset. The Vikings approached winter as a challenge to be studied, respected, and planned for. Long nights were not wasted. They were used for learning, crafting, storytelling, and strategizing. Children were trained to observe the weather, care for livestock, and handle fire safely. Elders shared knowledge of the land, the snow, and the wind, lessons that had kept their people alive for generations. Even in confinement, in the longhouses crowded with smoke, animals, and family, they found ways to maintain morale. Games, feasts, storytelling, and rituals gave purpose and joy to the endless darkness. The Viking mindset teaches us something timeless: when the environment is harsh, survival depends as much on the mind as on the body. Planning, knowledge, adaptation, and community can turn almost any hardship into a story of endurance. In a way, the frozen north was their classroom. Each wall, each hearth, each fur-lined garment was a lesson. And those who mastered it didn't just survive, they thrived. The Viking longhouse was more than just a shelter, it was the heartbeat of the settlement. Every detail, from its construction to the daily rhythms of life inside, was designed for survival. Inside, life was tightly organized around the fire. The hearth burned constantly, a roaring center of heat, light, and activity. Smoke curled upward, filling the high ceilings, and while it might seem uncomfortable to modern eyes, the Vikings relied on it. The smoke preserved the wooden beams, deterred pests, and acted as a natural insulator, trapping warmth where it was needed most. Raised platforms along the walls served multiple purposes. During the day, they were workspaces where spinning, weaving, and carving took place. At night, they became beds, insulated with straw, hay, and animal skins. Families slept huddled together, maximizing body heat and sharing warmth across generations. Children and the elderly were placed in the center, where it was warmest, while adults on the edges acted as living shields against drafts. Every corner of the longhouse was used wisely. Storage areas kept food close at hand, minimizing trips outside in freezing temperatures. Hanging racks of dried fish, cured meat, and barrels of skyr or butter lined the walls, creating a pantry that could last through months of polar night. Even animal pens were integrated into the house. Goats, sheep, and cows provided life-giving heat, and their proximity reduced the risk of frostbite for both humans and animals. Outside, the world was a frozen wasteland, but inside the longhouse, life pulsed with warmth and community. Craftspeople carved wood, repaired weapons, and made tools. Women spun wool and sewed garments that would protect the settlement through the winter. Children learned the skills and stories that had kept generations alive. The longhouse was also a center of social life. Games, storytelling, and celebrations filled the long nights. Sagas of gods, heroes, and distant voyages were recited by skilled storytellers, keeping the community connected and entertained. Even simple board games taught strategy and patience, sharpening minds and keeping spirits high. Through every storm and blizzard, the longhouse remained a sanctuary. It was a place where ingenuity, careful planning, and social cohesion combined to create not just shelter, but survival. In this sense, the Vikings' homes were more than buildings, they were living systems, each element carefully designed to keep life burning against the frozen darkness. In the frozen north, surviving the winter meant more than warm homes and clothing, it required a diet designed to fuel the body against relentless cold. The Vikings understood that food was more than sustenance, it was internal warmth, energy, and life itself. Their winter meals were rich in fats and proteins, carefully stored and prepared in advance. During the autumn months, they slaughtered livestock that could not survive the harsh months ahead. Meat was smoked, dried, or cured in the icy wind, turning it into concentrated energy sources that could last for years. These preserved foods could be eaten directly or boiled into hearty soups and stews. Fish was another cornerstone of their diet. Cod, herring, and other catches were dried without salt, leaving a hard, protein-rich staple that could be softened and cooked in soups during winter. Fish oil, rich in vitamin D, was consumed to compensate for the long, sunless nights, keeping bodies strong and healthy. Dairy played a critical role as well. Skyr, a thick fermented milk product, was stored in barrels alongside whey and butter. Butter wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity, providing long-lasting energy to fuel their internal fires. Grains were rare, but thick porridges made from barley or oats, enriched with meat or herbs, were standard winter meals. These hot, dense foods warmed the body from within, helping circulation and maintaining core temperature. Fermentation and pickling were also vital. Vegetables, meat, and even shark were preserved, providing nutrients when fresh food was scarce. The pungent smell might have been unpleasant, but it was a source of life in a frozen world. Every bite, every preserved meal, was carefully calculated to maximize energy and sustain the human furnace against the bitter cold. The Vikings' diet wasn't just about survival, it was a science of internal warmth. Every element, from fatty meats to fermented dairy, ensured that even in the darkest, coldest months, their bodies could generate heat and remain strong. Surviving the harsh northern winters wasn't only about staying warm, it was also about staying healthy. The Vikings understood that cleanliness and heat were inseparable in preserving life. While modern baths didn't exist, the Vikings had their own ingenious solutions, primitive saunas and steam baths that served both physical and social needs. Special small buildings or fenced-off corners were heated using stones made red-hot in the hearth. When water was thrown over these stones, clouds of scalding steam filled the space. The sudden rise in temperature cleansed the body, opening pores and removing weeks of dirt and toxins accumulated under layers of woolen clothing. This heat shock also strengthened the cardiovascular system, training the blood vessels to withstand sudden changes in temperature. After the steam, a roll in the snow would close the pores and invigorate the body, a practice that might seem shocking today but was a vital part of winter survival. Bathhouses were not only for cleanliness, they were centers of care. The sick, the elderly, and warriors with aching joints found relief in the warmth. Even childbirth often took place in these heated spaces, providing comfort in a world where cold could kill within hours. These bathhouses were also social hubs, quieter and more intimate than the communal longhouse. Here, people could converse openly, resolve disputes, and share knowledge. Nudity in these spaces created equality. There were no distinctions between lords, slaves, or children. Everyone was simply human, seeking warmth and health. In essence, the Viking steam bath combined hygiene, therapy, and social bonding, all under the guidance of survival necessity. In a world dominated by ice, such practices were not luxuries, they were life-saving strategies. Winter in the frozen north was harsh and unrelenting, but it was also a time for creativity, learning, and community. The longhouse was more than a shelter, it was the cultural heart of the settlement. Men and women spent long nights engaged in crafts that were essential for survival. Wood was carved into tools, weapons were repaired, and nets were woven for fishing. Women spun wool, sewed garments, and embroidered intricate patterns that combined beauty with functionality. These tasks kept hands busy, minds focused, and spirits engaged during months of darkness. Storytelling was central to Viking life. Sagas of gods, heroes, and far-off voyages transported listeners from smoky, cramped longhouses to the shining halls of Asgard. The oral tradition trained memory, reinforced social values, and gave everyone a shared sense of history and identity. In a way, these stories were both entertainment and education, teaching lessons of courage, cunning, and survival. Games and competitions also provided diversion. Board games, strategy games, and contests of skill helped pass the time while sharpening minds. Even during the coldest months, these activities brought excitement and camaraderie, keeping the community strong and connected. Winter festivals broke the monotony of the polar night. Feasts, sacrifices, and gift exchanges created stages of anticipation and joy. Abundant food and drink during these celebrations were more than indulgence, they were psychological lifelines, boosting morale and fostering hope. Respect for personal space was equally important. Even in crowded conditions, Vikings learned to allow others moments of solitude, preserving mental health and preventing conflict. Every aspect of winter life, from work to play, from storytelling to celebration, was part of a larger system designed to endure the season as a community. The Vikings understood that survival was not only physical, it was psychological. By keeping minds engaged, fostering creativity, and maintaining social bonds, they ensured that winter did not crush the spirit, even as it froze the world outside. Imagine a land where the sun barely rises for weeks, where the wind slices through even the thickest clothing, and the snow stretches endlessly, covering mountains, forests, and coastlines in a blinding white blanket. This was the world the Vikings called home, the frozen north. Here, survival was never guaranteed. Every gust of wind, every icy dawn, could bring death. The northern seas churned with relentless storms, sending waves crashing against jagged cliffs. Ships, though sturdy, were often at the mercy of nature, tossed upon waves like toys. Yet, it wasn't the sea alone that tested the Vikings, it was the land itself. Winter was a silent adversary, creeping in slowly but inexorably, freezing rivers, grounding crops, and turning fertile soil into a frozen battlefield. Settlements dotted the coastline and valleys, often carved into hillsides for shelter. These villages were small, tight-knit communities, each dwelling built with purpose. The longhouse, the heart of the settlement, was more than a home, it was a fortress against the cold, a beacon of warmth in a world of ice. Its walls, thick with timber or stone, were carefully chosen for their insulating properties. Moss, wool, and even layers of earth sealed the gaps, ensuring that the life-giving heat within could not escape. Outside, the landscape was both beautiful and deadly. Snow-laden forests whispered in the wind, hiding predators like wolves and bears. Mountains rose like frozen sentinels, their peaks invisible behind swirling clouds. Rivers were lined with ice, sometimes thin and treacherous, sometimes thick enough to support entire herds of animals. Yet, the Vikings thrived here, not by denying nature, but by understanding and respecting it. Winter dictated every action. Days were measured not by sunlight, which was scarce, but by activity and survival needs. The morning might begin with chopping wood, fetching water from frozen streams, or tending to livestock in the attached barn. Every step outside was calculated, the risk of frostbite was ever present. In this world, preparation was survival, foresight was life itself. But the frozen north was not just a place of survival, it was a crucible. It forged communities, strengthened bodies, and honed minds. The harsh winds taught resilience, the long nights encouraged ingenuity, and the scarcity of resources demanded cooperation. Children learned early that every action had consequences, every decision could mean life or death. The Vikings moved through this frozen expanse like shadows. Their knowledge of the terrain, the weather, and the cycles of nature was profound. They knew which winds brought storms, which slopes held safe passage, and which ice could support the weight of a man or a cart. Their survival wasn't accidental, it was the result of centuries of observation, trial, and adaptation. And yet, even in this frozen wilderness, life thrived. Mosses and hardy shrubs pushed through snowdrifts, wild berries waited patiently under ice, and rivers teemed with fish beneath frozen surfaces. The Vikings harvested, hunted, and fished with precision, ensuring that they had enough food to endure the long winter months. Every aspect of their lives, from shelter to diet to clothing, was meticulously planned to withstand the unforgiving cold. In this land of ice and shadow, the true Viking challenge emerged, not the enemies of the south, nor the storms at sea, but the silent, relentless winter. And it was here, against this backdrop of frost and wind, that the ingenuity, resilience, and ingenuity of the Viking people shone brightest. Amid the blinding snow and icy winds of the north, the Viking longhouse stood as a beacon of life. Unlike a simple shelter, it was a fortress of warmth, meticulously designed to withstand the harshest conditions nature could deliver. Its shape, its materials, and its orientation were all engineered with survival in mind, honed over generations of trial and error. At first glance, a longhouse might appear simple, an elongated structure with a pitched roof and walls that curve ever so slightly outward. But this curvature was no accident. Straight walls, the Vikings discovered, were vulnerable to the full force of gale winds, which could penetrate cracks, knock over supports, or carry precious heat away. Curved walls, however, caused the wind to flow smoothly around the house, reducing pressure and keeping the interior warm. It was an early, intuitive understanding of aerodynamics and engineering principles centuries ahead of its time. The longhouse was always strategically positioned. Builders studied the terrain and wind direction with painstaking care. The ends of the building faced the direction from which the coldest winds were least likely to blow. This small adjustment created a calm, sheltered zone inside, where the family could live without being battered by the storms raging outside. The floors were often dug slightly below ground level, using the earth itself as a natural insulator. Unlike air, the soil maintained a stable temperature, creating a thermos effect that kept the lower part of the house from freezing. Inside, space was used efficiently. There were no unnecessary partitions that could trap cold air or prevent heat from circulating. A single large hall allowed warmth from the central hearth to reach every corner. Low platforms along the walls formed cozy sleeping areas, taking advantage of rising warm air. Each cubic meter of space was deliberately designed to retain heat, ensuring that energy from the fire and human bodies wasn't wasted. The walls themselves were made from locally available materials, chosen for their insulating properties. In wooded areas, thick logs were tightly stacked, with gaps sealed using moss, wool, and even hair. In treeless regions like Iceland or Greenland, walls of stone and peat reached 2 meters thick, creating a solid barrier against the cold. Roofs were a marvel in their own right. Heavy turf layers, sometimes over half a meter thick, insulated the house while blending it seamlessly into the landscape. Grass grew atop the roof, adding a living layer that regulated temperature and moisture. The interior was organized around the langhel, the central hearth, which burned almost constantly. Smoke, instead of being vented immediately, filled the upper parts of the house, creating an additional insulation layer beneath the roof. This dense, acrid cloud might seem unbearable to modern sensibilities, but it was essential. It trapped heat, preserved the wooden beams, and kept pests at bay. Living in smoke was a compromise for survival, and the Vikings accepted it willingly. Even the arrangement of people and animals inside the longhouse was calculated. One end of the building served as a barn, housing goats, sheep, and cows. The animals generated heat naturally, which mixed with the warmth of the fire to maintain a livable temperature throughout the hall. People slept close together on platforms, sharing body heat. Children and the elderly were placed in the center, where warmth was greatest, while adults on the edges acted as living shields. The longhouse was more than architecture, it was a complex ecosystem. Every element, from the timber walls to the turf roof, from the hearth to the barn, worked in harmony to conserve energy and life. In these halls, families survived months of darkness and frost, never letting the harsh winter dictate their fate. The house was alive with warmth, light, and purpose, a testament to centuries of accumulated knowledge and ingenious adaptation. Beyond survival, the longhouse shaped the social life of the settlement. It was a place of work, rest, education, and storytelling. Crafts were honed, skills passed to children, and knowledge preserved. Here, in the heart of winter, the Vikings were not simply enduring, they were living fully, thriving even when the world outside was frozen. The design of the longhouse reveals something profound about the Viking mind. They did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as part of it. They studied the wind, the soil, the snow, and the sun, and integrated these forces into every plank, every roof layer, every hearth. Their homes were lessons in observation, patience, and ingenuity. In mastering the longhouse, they had mastered survival. In the frozen north, fire was not a luxury, it was life itself. Without it, the long, dark winters would have claimed every settlement. The Vikings understood this better than anyone, transforming their longhouses into living furnaces where heat, smoke, and ingenuity converged to create a habitable sanctuary in a world of ice. At the heart of every longhouse burned the langhel, a central hearth that was the soul of the home. Unlike modern fireplaces, this fire was not merely a place for cooking, it was the primary source of warmth, carefully managed and maintained around the clock. Smoke, which today might seem unbearable, was in fact a critical tool. Instead of being funneled directly through a chimney, it was allowed to accumulate under the high ridge of the roof. Here, it formed a dense, acrid cushion that acted as a natural insulator, trapping heat in the living area below and preventing precious warmth from escaping. Maintaining the hearth was a daily ritual, a task that demanded discipline and attention. Firewood was scarce, especially in remote northern colonies like Iceland and Greenland, where forests were thin or non-existent. Vikings became masters of resourcefulness, turning to peat, driftwood, and even dried animal manure as alternative fuels. Peat, cut from bogs and dried over the summer, burned steadily for hours, providing long-lasting warmth. Driftwood carried by ocean currents was collected, valued, and sometimes fought over, while dried manure served as a renewable, though pungent, energy source. The hearth's warmth was magnified by the longhouse's intelligent design. Thick walls, turf roofs, and low ceilings helped retain heat, while raised sleeping platforms took advantage of the natural rise of warm air. Even the placement of humans and animals was strategic. One end of the house often served as a barn, with cows, sheep, and goats producing biological heat. This living furnace, combined with the fire, kept the longhouse habitable even when temperatures outside plummeted far below freezing. Smoke had another vital function beyond insulation. It preserved the structure itself. The constant exposure to acrid smoke impregnated the wooden beams with soot and creosote, acting as a natural antiseptic that prevented rot in the damp northern climate. The same smoke also deterred pests, making the living space inhospitable for insects that could otherwise destroy wood or fabrics. Fire, in this way, was simultaneously a source of heat, protection, and preservation, a trifecta of survival. The Vikings' approach to energy was holistic. Heat was not only generated, it was conserved, multiplied, and recycled. Even small details were considered. Benches were positioned to catch rising warmth, straw and animal skins provided insulation for sleeping, and platforms were arranged to maximize shared body heat. Fire, smoke, and human ingenuity combined to create a dynamic thermal ecosystem where every action reinforced the next. Fuel management was a year-round endeavor. During summer, wood was chopped, peat harvested, and manure collected and dried. Every bit of combustible material was treated as precious. Wastage could mean disaster in midwinter. Fires were never allowed to die overnight, and the hearth became a symbol of vigilance and survival. In the morning, the fire ensured the longhouse remained warm, a shield against the freezing air outside. The hearth also shaped daily routines. Cooking, light, warmth, and even social activity were centered around it. Meals were prepared over the fire, providing nourishment and heat simultaneously. The scent of cooked meat and boiling stews mingled with the smoky air, a constant reminder of life amidst the relentless cold. Even the organization of sleeping areas was dictated by the hearth's glow. Those closest to the fire experienced the highest warmth, while others relied on layered insulation and body heat. In extreme cold, Vikings understood that survival required both external and internal heat. The hearth provided the external furnace, but diet played a critical role in maintaining the internal metabolic fire. High-fat and protein-rich foods, combined with fermented dairy and preserved meats, kept bodies generating warmth long after the fire had done its work. Fire and food were inseparable partners in the struggle against frost. The genius of the Viking approach lay in its integration. Walls, roofs, hearths, animals, and people all worked together as a unified system to conserve and multiply heat. It was not brute force that kept settlements alive, but careful observation, ingenuity, and constant adaptation. The longhouse was a living organism, breathing warmth, circulating heat, and defending against the deadly cold. In the frozen north, fire was more than warmth, it was civilization itself. It turned harsh, uninhabitable landscapes into homes, schools, workshops, and cultural centers. In the glow of the hearth, the Vikings thrived, crafting a life that defied the cruelty of winter. Every ember was a weapon against death, every flame a lifeline, and every carefully tended fire a testament to human resilience. In a world where winter could freeze exposed flesh within minutes, survival depended as much on clothing as on fire. The Vikings did not rely on luck, they relied on centuries of accumulated knowledge, turning wool, fur, leather, and ingenious layering techniques into armor against the relentless cold. The foundation of a Viking wardrobe was wool, the fiber of life in the north. Sheep provided more than warmth, their wool contained lanolin, a natural wax that made the fabric water repellent. Snow and rain rolled off coarse woolen cloth without soaking the wearer, while even damp wool continued to trap heat, insulating the body from the biting air. In a time before synthetic fibers, wool was not just fabric, it was a lifeline. Layering was key. Vikings understood that warmth was generated not only by the material, but also by the air trapped between layers. A soft linen shirt against the skin formed the base layer, comfortable and breathable. Over it, A woolen tunic created the primary insulating layer, while a thick wool cloak, often lined with fur, formed the outer barrier against wind and snow. This combination created a microclimate around the body, allowing heat to accumulate and cold to stay out. Pants were carefully tailored for warmth and mobility. Wide at the top and tapered at the bottom, Viking trousers allowed freedom of movement while keeping the legs insulated. Woolen bands wrapped around the shins prevented snow from entering shoes or boots, a simple but essential innovation. Footwear was equally sophisticated. Leather shoes, impregnated with animal fat for waterproofing and stuffed with dry grass or wool, served as the prototypes of modern insulated boots. Every step through snow or ice was protected by centuries of trial and adaptation. Fur was reserved for the harshest conditions. Bear, wolf, and seal skins were invaluable, each chosen for specific properties. Seal fur, nearly impervious to wind and water, was used for coats and gloves, while bear and wolf pelts lined cloaks and hats, protecting the most vulnerable parts of the body. Fur-lined hats and hoods insulated the head and ears, preventing heat from escaping through these critical points. Gloves, mittens, and leg wraps ensured that extremities remained functional, even in the coldest hours of the polar night. Every piece of clothing was multifunctional. Cloaks could double as blankets, woolen tunics could serve as emergency insulation for sleeping, and furs could be layered or removed depending on activity. Vikings were constantly aware of temperature changes, wind direction, and activity level, adjusting their clothing dynamically. This adaptability was part of their genius, a living system of thermal regulation that required awareness, skill, and experience. Women played a critical role in this system. Long winter evenings were spent spinning wool, weaving cloth, and sewing garments that would endure months of harsh conditions. These tasks were not mere domestic chores, they were acts of survival. The production of woolen fabric was laborious, starting from shearing sheep to cleaning, carding, spinning, and finally weaving. A single winter garment could take weeks to produce, yet it was invaluable, often being passed down or used as a form of wealth and currency. Children were trained from an early age in proper layering, clothing care, and movement in snow. They learned to bundle efficiently, protect extremities, and maintain their gear. Their understanding of clothing was as vital as their knowledge of hunting, fishing, and farming. Their survival depended on it. Accessories were just as important. Woolen scarves, hoods, and leg wraps prevented snow from entering clothing layers, while belts and ties helped keep garments snug and heat-trapping. Fur-lined bags and pouches insulated food, tools, and other essentials, preventing them from freezing. Even the simplest tools and everyday items were adapted to the extreme environment. The Vikings' clothing system reveals a sophisticated understanding of physics and human physiology. They recognized that body heat could be trapped, that moisture could sap warmth, and that movement required freedom without compromising insulation. Their layering strategy was a dynamic response to an ever-changing environment, blending science, intuition, and craftsmanship. Fire, shelter, and clothing were the triumvirate of survival. One without the others could be fatal. Together, they created a habitable microcosm in the frozen north, a life-sustaining system against the forces of nature. In their garments, the Vikings carried centuries of experience, knowledge, and ingenuity, turning simple materials into weapons against frost, wind, and snow. Even in the most brutal winters, they walked, worked, and thrived, encased in layers of wool and fur. Clothing was not fashion, it was armor, survival, and life itself.